Cassie, again, thank you very much. My name is Grady Jennings, and I run
I'm
a
sorry, can I say one more thing?
You may.
Grady has been doing this for a while, and he will introduce all of you stuff, but we've had a number of families who have gone through and worked with him and Forrest, and we wouldn't have him here if we didn't think that he had some good stuff. So, and it's not a sales presentation, which is always nice to know when you're listening to people too, so.
Thank you. Basically, my name is Grady Jennings, and I am the executive director for a nonprofit organization called Dignity Group. It's an organization that had its infancy starting in 1997, and basically was started with my son, who was born in 1990 with Down syndrome. And through the course of that, my background comes out of the financial services world. That's where I started. And when I was trying to sit back and get some general information as it related to my son, what I really found was that what I knew was enough to be very dangerous. And what I knew and found out really quickly is that whatever I was setting out to do for myself and my family was going to potentially wind up having a negative implication on my son. Let's ignore health issues, let's ignore education issues, because those are a whole can of worms themselves anyway. And so what I found in my research was that there was just not a lot of people who I really felt had the best interests of my son in their heart, and all they wanted me to do was to buy things to make life better or to create things that just didn't seem like it made a whole lot of sense, and really try to take a look at where I felt their interests were in trying to make sure that my son was going to be safe and going to be protected. In doing a bunch of research, what I really found was that there was just not a lot of people who really understood the dynamics of living inside the special needs world, and that's why our mission statement is really how do we help empower families understanding what we call the economic and legal aspects of having a child with special needs. And there's all kinds of different rules, so that's what we hope to do is try to give you some of the very basic information and how the things are driven within our children's lives and what's going to happen and the fears that we have, so that we do have the ability to prepare the roadmaps for successor caregivers as we move down the line. Also tonight with me, Forrest Wolfe is an attorney. He has done a lot of our estate planning work for our clients over the years. Somebody that I have a lot of trust and respect for. He's just done a great job for our families over the years, as Cassie has alluded to. And he's going to speak a little bit tonight when we get through some of the different things and start talking a little bit more in terms of the word called trust and things of that nature. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hand out these folders, and he who comes walking in last will probably have to sit in the front row. And the first thing I have to go through a test is I have to tell you the instructions with these manuals are not to open up until I tell you to, because I have to determine who has really the behavior issues, you or your children. No, I give two, so you can give it to a friend. We share these things with anybody and everybody. So, and how old is the child that you guys are here for? 14 years old. How many other siblings? One sibling. How old? 10 years old. Great, thank you. Oh, I thought she opened it. Wow. And how old is the child that you're here for? 20 years old? Great. And then I'll let you go back. Inside the book that we're going to talk about tonight, I'm going to give you just some basic rules with it. And what we want to take a look at is a couple things. There's some pieces of information here that I think are pretty important for things that we may be looking at. On the right-hand side of the packet is going to be an article from Protection and Advocacy, which is now called Disability Rights, that talks about conservatorships, trusts, and wills for people with developmental disabilities and other disabilities. But where we're going to start working on, and what I'd like to have you do, and also we have prepared a little book that's dedicated to my son. And you know, you talk about changes, and the things that we talk about in here are not things that we want to talk about. We don't want to talk about the day of when we're not going to be here. And I was in an unfortunate situation where in 2006 my wife passed away when my son was 16 years old. And so through going through that firsthand experiences of having my wife and it being just my son and I, And to think that I was going to be the father of a child with special needs, to think that I was going to be a widow, or widower is what I've called, at age 48, was just not something that was inside of my game plan. And 6 years, again, James came along 6 years after we had my wife's tubes tied. So we kind of got these little things that life throws us little curves every now and then that create changes within our lives, whether we want to them or not. And so we have to realize that we're going to have a lot of these changes. I've been a very blessed man from the standpoint that I know that there's been a lot of things that have happened along the way. 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago, my son passed away as well at 19 and a half years old. Again, grateful for the experience of what happens at the age of 18 and going through those experiences. And so we've kind of gone through full circle with different things. We've been working officially again with Dignity Group. I've been doing this now for 17 years, and it was shortly after my son passed away that we turned it into a nonprofit. We don't charge families for any of the work that we do for them. Our goal and my job is to really take the things that I learned as a father in a system that I think is very overwhelming, it's very confusing, it's a lot of stuff, and yet here we are facing different challenges. So whether we have a child who's 14 years old, whether we have two children that are 21 and 20 years old, and how old is the child that you're here representing?
He's
13 years old. So what we have is we have a representation right now of situations that, to me, whether our children are 13, whether they're 18, whether they're 25, when's the best time for us to prepare? And knowing the experiences that I've gone through, to me, the best time is as soon as we can to at least start creating the baselines. We're here because we're scared of what's going to happen to our children if we're not around. We're scared of what the future holds. We've become, in a sense, very protective parents, haven't we? Scared to death. Oh my God, we see the decisions that they make out there. We're scared of people taking advantage of them. So what we have to be able to do is understand how all the process works and the different benefits that are going to be out there for them, and how do we try to maximize those benefits. And so even though our kids are all part of a generic world, what we want to talk about is some of those things that will exist inside that generic world, and then how do we then try to apply it to each of ourselves within our own families, within our own dynamics. Because the one thing that we have to realize is that what our children do have is they have benefits. And what are those benefits, and what do those benefits mean, not just for today's, but for the tomorrows? And why is there safety in some of those things along the way? So that being said, our working document is going to be the page that looks like this. And I like to use my old-fashioned overheads because it just makes more sense to me. And I can understand my overheads. I don't understand those things that you got to use push buttons, even though this light will go out every now and then. What color pen do you guys want me to start with tonight? You want me to start with black, red, green, yellow, orange, brown? I don't think brown will go really well on that wall, do you? Blue or purple? Which color pen? Purple, okay. If somebody doesn't like the color purple after I've been writing for a while, say next color, please. So the first thing we want to be able to try to talk about tonight is we have to understand, because if I can get, let me ask you a question. Do you think your child has a financial plan? No? What about you? No? In a traditional sense of the word, our kids don't. And if I can really have you grab onto one thing tonight. Oh, you're late, aren't you? Wow. Another folder I have to do. We already listened to some of this in the back? And how old is the child you're representing? I know, trick questions really early in the night.
15, but most through to 17, and she'll be 18 in July.
Wait. Say that one more
A
time.
15-year-old
Okay.
and 17.
Okay, and both identified with special needs?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other children? Okay. Yeah, I'll make fun of them if they want. It's much funner to do it that way. But if I can have one thing where you guys can walk out of here tonight, is realize that your child does have a financial plan. And our children have a financial plan that's going to be created because of who they happen to be. And so if I can walk with anything out, is you can feel comfortable. It says there's something in place. Now, it may not be what you and I would want, because our world is very much different than our kids. So, but we're going to talk about the basics of what their planning is. Social Security, SSI, we'll talk about medical, we'll talk about housing. We're going to talk a little bit about things that we call the product versus the process, and why sometimes great products don't necessarily create great results. We're going to talk about some of the traps that and mistakes that we make as parents. And again, try to understand our family. So even though my son was a part of the regional center system, he was a part of the IEP, those are all things that are all common to all of us, isn't it? All right? So it's not really until it all comes home that the uniqueness of each family kind of creates its own dimensions within that generic world. So we want to understand how we've got to take a look at all of the different working parts. How do we get everything and resources all integrated and coordinated with each other? And it's work. It's not easy. But these are the things that we want to start taking a look at and how they all fit. And how do we deal with setting up proper legal and estate planning? And how do we coordinate and integrate assets? And unfortunately, because we live in a part of our world consists of mistakes. And that's what we seem that we're always trying to do, is sometimes clean up the mistakes that we sat there and said, if they were here one day earlier, maybe these mistakes would have taken place and would have cost a lot of money or a lot of time or put a lot of pressure on different things. Right now, who's the payee on the SSI for the boys?
I am on one of them.
Okay.
The other one.
He's his own payee? Okay, thank you. Do you go to those Social Security meetings too? No? Don't want to, huh?
Usually not convenient.
And it never really is it? You know? And that's where, again, we come back to our lives are driven, for the most part, by our kids, aren't they? All right? We live in a 24/7 disability world. And that's what happens with a lot of the families that we work with and the people that we have to work with. So many of them don't understand that we are controlled by that disability. We're controlled by the dynamics of that special need. And we try to have employment, we try to have all these other things wrapped around it. You know, we realize how much work our kids take. Again, not that it's good, not that it's bad, it's just the way it is. And so we can't really get around that. So this is going to be our topics of discussion for tonight. What I'd like to have you look at is to turn to that little document that I just talked about that had that on the front page and go to the third page. Something that's going to look like this model right here. And I don't know how well you guys can see that in the back. That's why I like to give little handouts so that way we can play interactive, for lack of a better word. So what I started talking about earlier was our children's financial plan. How do I spell financial?
With an F.
With an F, not a PH. So let's think about the first thing that our children are going to get. The first thing that we commonly think of is benefits from Social Security. Remind me not to write on this wall. So the first thing that we're going to be taking a look at is benefits from Social Security. And there are two primary rules. The rules that occur when our children are under the age of 18 and the rules that occur when our children are over the age of 18. Our studies have shown us that 98% of all the kids that are eligible for regional center services will become eligible for Social Security benefits. Okay? So when my son was under the age of 18, the system said, yes, he is disabled. Social Security says he is disabled. But they wanted to know how much money I made or how much money I had. So even though Social Security considers a child with Down syndrome presumptively disabled, that doesn't mean he's going to collect a check from the system. Our families with autism or spectrum disorders are not considered to be an automatic approval at the Social Security level. You have to prove the disability instead. So my child now who's been under the age of 18 may disqualify for those benefits because of me. So now all of a sudden he reaches age 18, what does the system say? What's the magic number? How much money can't they have?
I'm so confused on that.
You're-
2,000.
2,000.
Yeah, they can't have.
They
more
can't have
than
more than $2,000 in their name. So, again, I no longer count, but as long as my child has less than $2,000 in their name, because if they have any more than $2,000 in their name, guess what they're not going to get? They're not going to get that Social Security benefit. Okay? So for 17 years, 364 days, I potentially punish my child because of my work. And it causes us sometimes to do crazy things, stupid things, foolish things. I mean, I've had families that I knew kept money in envelopes in the freezer just to be below that asset base. Now, do I promote that? No, I just tell that as a story, but it makes you realize that we can't do things on a traditional basis in order to sit back and do certain things. If our children are getting benefits from the Medicare or from Social Security, it's automatically going to link them over to some form of medical insurance. And the language that we know is Medi-Cal. Now, the rules of this new Obamacare, for lack of a better word, has changed a lot of things. We don't fully know or understand the dynamics of what it means, but for the most important part is that it means that our kids are never going to have to worry about whether or not an insurance company will accept them because they're insurable. That's the most important part. So if I've got a family where the child might be on as a dependent on their health insurance and it's costing a lot of money for dependent health care, I now have the ability to remove them from that plan and put them into their own health plan because of Obamacare, and I don't have to worry about whether they're insurable or not, okay? And that's been one of the biggest obstacles. So what we look at, though, is that for the most part, our kids, once they're eligible for SSI, are also going to be eligible for Medi-Cal. Now, Medi-Cal, again, what it meant prior to all these new healthcare rules and what it meant today are two different things. But the fact remains is that what we need to remember is the eligibility for the Medi-Cal, which is really what we're looking for. We're no longer looking at for the element of health insurance. We're looking forward to the terms of what it's going to link over to along the way. So what I see is that right now my child, because of who they happen to be, is going to basically be eligible to get a check every month and be able to have health insurance that's paid for him through the Medi-Cal system, even if it's through the Obamacare side. Now, how many of us in this room could just go walk up to somebody and say, hey, give me a check every month because I'm cute? It's not going to happen to me. Any of us in this room? I mean, look at your two kids are getting a check every month because of who they happen to be. You didn't get to have that luxury. Remember when you guys were 18, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, struggling like crazy, college, whatever the case might be, and yet our kids, because of who they happen to be, are going to receive a check every month. But as long as what? They have less than $2,000 in their name. It's just, it's very strange. And so what happens then is that when we have that Medi-Cal, it's also going to create some links. It also has the potential to link us over to a program called In-Home Support Service. So it gives me a tool in which I as a parent have the potential to get paid for providing services for my child. Okay? And they have a couple of different types of programs out there: protective supervision, personal care programs. But the bottom line is that unless I have the Medi-Cal, I'm not going to be able to get to the IHSS drawer. Okay? The other thing that's pretty cool, depending on our perspectives, because isn't our concern of not just who's going to be there for my kid if I'm not, but also where's my kid going to live? What's that model going to look like? And so the beauty of it is that I do have an option. Is that I can at some point in time get a hold of Regional Center, my caseworker, and say, hey, it's time for us to start taking a look at some form of alternative housing. Whether it be a supported living model, whether it be an independent living model, whether it be a group home model, whatever that model happens to be becomes personal to ourselves. Now, we may be looking at keeping our kids within our house forever because we're scared or whatever the case might be. But what I saw, especially, and this really gave me my wake-up call when my wife had passed away. Because all of a sudden, when my little guy turned 18, I turned 50, all of a sudden my mortality started coming knocking on my door, and I just got scared like there was no tomorrow. So even though I had things prepared on paper, I still had to really start thinking about that real world experience that says if something happens to me tomorrow, and even though I have things on paper, it became more harsher of a reality emotionally, mentally, physically, because I got scared. But what I sat back and realized, and even though we all have, we deal with education, we deal with regional center, we deal with all of these weird places out there that have all these kinds of acronyms and codes they live by. But what I really sat back, I called the lady who at the time was the executive director of Regional Center, and actually thanked her that agency was there, because what I realized is that my son was never going to be homeless because of those models. Now, it may not be the way I want it to be, it may not have been set up the way I wanted it to, so that's why I took some steps and measures to set it up the way I wanted it to be set up. But what I knew was that my son was never going to be homeless. That was such a secure feeling. It's not a feeling I was able to have for my other two girls. It wasn't even a feeling that I can have for myself. So, again, when I come back to it, I sit there and say, wow, my kid's got potential income, health insurance, possibly somebody to get paid for taking care of his needs. He's got housing availability for him. And the other thing that's really cool is because of our kids, I also know for the most part they're not going to be unemployed unless either they choose to be unemployed or we choose for them to be unemployed. And I use occupation in a different sense. Who's going to the VIP? Your oldest, okay? So the bottom line is that you found a place through transition programs for your oldest one to go get a job. And guess what? He got that job, didn't he? Now, is it what we want it to look like? Is it what the job we would have? Of course not. Okay? But we all had to start somewhere too, didn't we? We just expect our kids to be we expect them to be running the companies right away. We forget what it was like when we were young, struggling to get our first jobs. And we have to take the same approach. But the cool part of it is that your child had a job waiting for him, didn't it? Now, what did you also have to do? You also had to make sure that even though you wanted that child was going to be working there, we had to go through and make sure that Regional Center was going to approve it and they were going to pay the program. Okay? Now, if your child was not ready for a work program or something, we also have day programs, don't we? All right? So we have a lot of things that are out there. So even though it may not be a job, it may not be an occupation, what's the most important thing for our kids once they get out of the education system? Occupying. Something to occupy them so they're not occupying us. Okay? So these are the things that I see are so valuable for our kids and our families, is that because I know, bottom line, is that I don't have anybody sending me a check every month because of who I am, or saying, hey, you want health insurance? And by the way, because I'm going to take care of my kid whether that check is coming in or not. Because it's almost immaterial, isn't it? It's there as a bonus, it's nice. But we as parents are going to do what we do regardless of what's going to be coming in up here. When will those things become important? If something happens to me, that's going to become so much more important because I'm going to do it because that's just my kid. But when somebody comes out and going to do it, that becomes what? A job? A chore? A task? Nobody's going to have that same labor of love that we do they? It's scary. I mean, think about right now. How many people pick up the phone and call any one of our kids and say, hey, can Johnny come out and play? God, aren't we the ones that are doing almost all the initiations? of all those activities. I almost got some spit built up in my mouth. Ooh, that was weird. But what we have to look at is that we take that practicality and say, okay, this is what we have. How do we now work with it to try to get through to the tomorrows? So I look at all these benefits, but again, let's go back and say what's the most important thing that we see up here is our kids can't have more than $2,000 in their name. Wow. When my son was first born, I was told I had to disinherit him. Really? How weird does that sound? But that's what I was told. And I was told for very good reasons, because he couldn't have more than $2,000 in his name. So Grady, you have to disinherit him. Oh no, this is wrong. So once we start understanding what their plans look like, now we have to sit back and say, okay, what's going on in our personal worlds, and how does what we're doing as families overlap into their world? So I'm going to change pens now. So let's assume, for argument's sake, I bought a $300,000 life insurance policy. Now, again, by traditional standards, I'm usually buying a life insurance policy to do what? Protect my family if something happens to me, and that's typically considered to be a good thing, right? Again, typically I would name my spouse as my primary beneficiary, and maybe somebody would name my children of the insured as contingent beneficiaries. How many of us have retirement plans, by the way? Okay. Who's the beneficiary on your retirement plan right now? Your wife? And you two will nothing will ever happen to the two of you, right? Okay. So you two are gone tomorrow. Who's your beneficiaries? You what?
My kids after that.
Your kids after that? Okay. And what you guys? Same thing? Everybody's good with their kids, same thing. Okay. So what have we just said? They can't have what? More than $2,000 in their name. So again, whether it's money sitting inside my life insurance policy, whether it's in my retirement plan, whether it's in my house, kind of immaterial, okay? But it works for my illustration here, most importantly. But again, I may name my wife as my primary beneficiary, my children as contingent beneficiaries. Sometimes people put nobody on as contingent beneficiaries, as though two people don't go at the same time, even though we know it's rare, but we know it happens. But all of a sudden, my wife passes away, and I'm gone. Now what's going to happen is that by having my 3 children named as beneficiaries, what's going to happen? Is that my 2 older daughters would each be able to receive what? $100,000 to do whatever they want to do with it. But if my son got that $100,000, what happens? All of these benefits that they're getting are completely exposed now, aren't they? Because all of a sudden, now it might happen that somebody says, well, he can't handle it because he's got special needs. So now all of a sudden I might have to throw that money into the court system. Or I could go instead, because I was told I could take a shortcut. So I could go to my middle daughter, who's now 36, and keeping my children have aged through this process, okay? And I can go to my daughter, who's now 37 years old, who was once upon a time much younger. And I can say to her, Jessica, I'd like you to be the one who is going to, here's $200,000. I'm going to name you as 2/3 beneficiary of this insurance policy. Because your brother can't have more than $2,000 in his name. So here's $200,000. You can go do whatever you want to do with your $100,000, but you got to keep that other $100,000 earmarked for your brother, because guess what? That Social Security check may play a different role in her life, huh? If she's going to be the caregiver. Paid supports. So all of a sudden I have a huge risk, don't I? Because now, what have I done? I've just given this to somebody that says, you're going to have a perfect Ken and Barbie life. Haven't I? Because I haven't taken into consideration, again, not that I want bad things to happen to my daughter, but things happen out there in life. What if all of a sudden she gets sick? What happens if all of a sudden she loses her job? What happens if one of her children, which I still can't say the word grandfather yet to me, so she has children. But what happens? Where do you think that money's going to do? What if all of a sudden her husband says, I want a divorce? Please edit that part of it out. But if all of a sudden the husband comes up and says, I want a divorce, who do you think that money's now community property, isn't it? Or what if my daughter passes away, God forbid? Do I really trust my son-in-law or my daughter's 2 kids to take care of my son? Not necessarily. You know, I used to watch that interaction. My son happened to sometimes, I felt like he had the plague. And I say that lovingly and endearingly, not in a real negative way, because I didn't like him as a boyfriend, I do like him better as a husband. But what I've done, though, by trying to take that shortcut, I created a whole different level of exposure for the one kid who needs as much protection as I possibly can. So leaving him as a direct beneficiary has a problem. Leaving it to somebody else to say, hey, take care of, has another set of problems, doesn't it? Because what would be the perfect world? The perfect world would be for us to do what? Be able to leave our children whatever we wanted to leave them. And be able to make sure that whatever may happen in somebody else's life is not going to impact their monies or their benefits. And I want to be able to sit back and protect those benefits. Because these are my child's benefits. I'll never forget. I used to sit back and in the very beginning, it's like, oh, I don't need any of this stuff. I can do this. I can take care of my own kid. Until a friend of mine in Social Security sat there and says, Grady, those aren't your benefits. Those are your child's benefits. Those benefits belong to your child. It's your job to protect them and maximize them for your child. Now, the system doesn't come up to us and say, as we were mentioned earlier, here's a shopping list. Okay? It just doesn't do that. We have to attack to make sure that we're getting all the maximum benefits that we possibly can. So, these are the major things that are going to be playing in our children's lives. Again, what do I think about it? I think it's such a great safety net for our kids, but unless we're doing things to protect ourselves, we're putting our kids at risk at the one point in time that we don't have the ability to undo the damage without costing a lot of time and money for our kids. So I always come back and say, when's the right time? When's not the right time? That focus is now. So, because what's the perfect world? A, how can I get my child what I want them to have with the dreams that I have? How do I sit back and protect the benefits? And how do I protect them from the actions of others? Because that'd be the perfect world we could design, couldn't it? So, this is where, how many of us in this room have already done any type of wills or trust planning ourselves?
Process.
I'm sorry?
We're in the process.
In the process, what does that mean?
One reason why we're here.
Okay.
We wanted to set up a living trust, but we don't want to take care of that with a special needs child. That we don't want to just leave.
You can't do it the same way.
Right. We don't want to just leave $1 million to him when he's 18.
Well, you can adopt me. I have no problems with that. Indignity Group is a nonprofit, so it's open doors. So you can make us as beneficiaries as well. I say that all this loving and just. Those are the only commercials I throw for any of us. Or being as a child, I'm adoptable. And this is where I'm going to introduce Forrest here in a second. But basically, what we do want to do is we do want to create our family estate planning documents. And the first thing that we want to take a look at is trying to create our living trust. But for our kids, we want to create the special needs trust. And I'm not going to dive a whole lot into this, but because I speak in a different language than he speaks, the special needs trust to me, my family trust is my ultimate distribution tool. It's where I want my stuff to go. But I can't do it the same way that I do it for a traditional family because it creates its own set of problems. And what we want to do for our kids, in its unique language, is that we want to create that special needs trust. And in that trust, I can have as much money, cash, or asset as I want without worrying about losing any of the benefits.
you want to take over now, or do you want me to? See, we just never know, because I just start rolling like there's no tomorrow. What do you want to do? Talk to me.
But your child will never get the money from that special needs trust, right? Somebody's gonna administer it, and
Well-
it'll never actually go to your child?
Correct, because our children. Come on, we'll dog and pony this. You want to write on my sheet?
Okay.
I'll go for it.
Want me to move?
Never has me come. He never tells me when it is he's going to have me start talking.
Spontaneous.
Yeah, as Grady was saying, the special needs trust is a way that you can leave your child an inheritance or have other people make gifts to them or whatever you want. You can get to your child and they'll still get their Medi-Cal, they'll still get their SSI, still get any other benefits that they'd be entitled to if they didn't have the money. The most important thing is to set up your living trust, because if you don't set up a trust or you don't have wills, the state assumes who you'd want to have your property, and that's going to be either your spouse and or your kids equally. And a lot of people don't realize, you think, well, if I pass away, as long as my spouse is there, they're going to get everything, and then he or she can create a trust and take care of things. But in California, if you have any separate property, if you inherited property from your parents or someone else, and you kept it separate property doesn't automatically go to your spouse. Your separate property is going to be divided up depending upon whether you've got one or more than one child. If you've got one child, your spouse is going to end up with half of separate property, your child's going to end up with the other half. If you have more than one child, the spouse is going to end up with a third, the kids end up with 2/3. But in any case, the California statute assumes that's what you'd want to have happen if you don't create a will or you don't create a trust saying where you want things to go. So again, create your living trust, and in the living trust, if you've got 3 kids, you may have living trust pay out to the other 2 kids outright when you pass away, their 2/3 share or whatever share it is you want. But the other third is going to transfer from your living trust over to that special needs trust. And that special needs trust is going to be able to take care of anything for your child that the government's not providing for. And as Grady said before, some people try to get around creating these things or creating a special needs trust by leaving things to one of their other children. But what happens there again is it becomes at risk. Your other child may go through a divorce and lose that money. They may be in an accident on the freeway, they get sued for more than their insurance policy, and suddenly that money that they were holding on to for their brother or sister suddenly is at risk and may go to pay their liabilities. But instead, you can have that same child be the successor trustee on the special needs trust. They're still doing the same job, they're taking care of that money for their brother or sister or the special needs, but it's not their money. So if they're sued or if they get divorced or whatever might happen in their life, it does not put the money at risk, because all they are is managing that money for their brother or sister. So you can have the same people in place to take care of things, but again, you don't have to worry about what might happen in their life. And the other thing you can do too, Craig said, well, what if you leave it to his other daughter and she passes away, so suddenly it goes to her family? Well, with the trust, you're going to name alternate successor trustees. So the first person you name, whether they've started acting or not, if they can't do it, or they can't do it anymore because they've become sick or they've passed away, you're going to have alternate successor trustees in there. So there's always somebody there during your child's lifetime to take care of the assets for them. And again, the most important thing is picking out who those trustees are going to be, because you want people that you're going to trust to do a good job. And a lot of times I know, especially Grady likes people to have co-trustees, because then you've got 2 people acting together. They can both kind of share the duties. You've got checks and balances. You've got people looking over each other's shoulder, so you don't have one trustee that suddenly one of their kids is in jail in Mexico or something, and they take that money out to take care of their own kid. You've got, two people there as co-trustees that are going to make sure that everything happens the way it should. Now, the trustees do a little bit different job than the guardian or conservator. We'll talk a little bit about guardianship and conservatorship. There's two types of conservatorship. And again, conservatorship is just a guardianship for someone who's over the age of 18. If they can't handle financial or personal matters on their own. Now, the special needs trust should almost always completely get rid of the need to have a guardianship or conservatorship of the estate, because everything that you're going to leave to your child, you're going to leave to them in the special needs trust. So there won't be a conservatorship of the estate. There won't be a guardian for their estate, because they aren't going to have an estate, because you're going to make sure that they don't have more than $2,000 in their name. So there's not going to be a need to have someone appointed by the court that's going to take care of their financial matters. You still may need a conservator of the person. And again, a conservator of the person doesn't have anything to do with finances, but if someone needs to be appointed to make sure that your kids have, where they're going to live, make educational decisions, make decisions on whether or not they're going to be able to get married, who their friends are going to be, that type of thing, then you get a conservatorship of the person. And again, those can be different people than the trustees, or they could be the same people. It really depends upon what your situation is. I know my family, I trust them with my life and making decisions for me if something happened, but I certainly don't trust them with any of my financial matters. So you may have people that are really good with personally acting with your children, but they may not be very good financially. So you can have separate people as trustees and conservators. Again, if a conservator is needed, and they're not always needed, some people. Does anybody here have a conservatorship on their kids? Okay.
I'm looking into guardianship or conservatorship.
Okay.
And I'm scoping with the regional center as a contact, but I need to get it going for Jersey.
Well, maybe you do it and maybe you don't. There are people out there that are saying conservatorship is the end-all, be-all. You always have to have a conservatorship. But again, we've got parents of people that are over 18 or in their 20s that don't have conservatorship. You don't always need a conservatorship. It really depends on what's happening in the kid's life. As long as when you go to the doctor looks to you to make decisions and shares information with you, you may not need it for medical purposes. And as long
Right.
Yeah.
The biggest problem that we have, that we see with conservatorship, is people are coming at us with, I need to get a conservatorship. And we're saying,
I don't know why or anything, but
I want to know why. Because there's so much, again, we live in that world where we have what I call misinformation, disinformation, and myth-information. And so what we need to be able to do, again, as parents, we need to be able to make an informed decision. And that's, again, where we come back to that empowerment part of information, is that if we understand what it's going to do or what it's not going to do, yes, and the problem is that we're dealing with a lot of people that really don't understand the dynamics of what it really means and are just doing it on a fear-based or emotion-based. Okay, now.
Because I didn't know if it would be that guardianship or the power of attorney.
Well, if your child is over the age of 18, normally if you're their natural parent, you're going to be their guardian until age 18. When they turn 18, though, and you want to still fulfill that rule legally in the eyes of the state, then you have to ask for conservatorship. And again, you're not automatically a conservator because you're the parent. At age 18, technically, they're adults and can do whatever they want to do.
She's not capable of making decisions.
Okay.
But are we?
Then a lot of kids aren't, but
Right. And again, you have to look at ourselves. Are we capable of making decisions? We have what we have forgotten how to do as parents is we've forgotten how to think typical. Okay, and we really have to think as typical as we can in that decision-making process, okay? Compare them to our other 18-year-olds, okay? Or our other, again, think about us when we were all 19 and 20 years old. We made all the most stellar decisions we possibly could, right? I mean, I watched my daughter do certain things that, really? Okay, so decision-making is not necessarily a bad thing, because nobody's immune from making good decisions, and nobody's immune from making bad decisions. They're just decisions is what they are. But we always want to try to make an informed decision. Is it important for you in your estate planning to sit back and say, if there is ever a need for a conservator on behalf of my child somewhere down the line, these are the people I'd like to nominate? You bet.
Right, and that's what
Okay.
you're always going to want to do. Because oftentimes, conservatorship may not be needed as long as you as the parent is alive and everybody's dealing with you. You may not need a conservator. But oftentimes, once you're gone, no one's going to look to your child's brother or sister or an aunt or uncle or whoever it is to get the same kind of consent that they would normally take from you, even though legally you can't give it starting at age 18. Oftentimes, doctors, educational institutions, everyone else is going to deal with you, even if you don't have the
So
conservatorship.
we're doing the same thing at the church. Two-year-old stepson has spastic
Mm.
So it's like he's made, and then it's a whole long thing. We're like, we can't do anything.
Yeah.
You just have to
And
live with it.
but he is, the courts would probably say he may be physically incapacitated.
He's mental. He's like an 8-year-old. So, and I'm like,
Yeah.
nothing was ever.
Yeah. So again, oftentimes the cases where you need a conservatorship is where you're having those type of behavioral type issues, as opposed to if your child is just goes along with whatever mom and dad says, you're not going to have that. But if they're butting heads with you and people see that, and they're not going to go with what you say if he's saying otherwise. So, but again, if you're not around, you definitely are going to want to nominate ahead of time possible conservators if one is needed.
That's
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Before we went off on conservatorship, what were we talking about?
Marrying assets.
Marrying assets.
You're marrying assets. You were about to say something about assets.
Yeah, and the important thing too is it's not just setting up your estate planning documents, your living trust, and your special needs trust, and your wills. You need to make sure that you've got all your assets in the trust. And a lot of people don't realize that the trust acts like a will because it says who gets your stuff when you pass away, but it's also like a contract in that your trust can only control those things that you put in the name of your trust. And I don't mean your trust says, I own a house and it goes to so-and-so. Your trust has to say, or the deed on your house now has to read, John and Jane Doe, trustees of the Doe Family Trust. It's not John and Jane Doe, husband and wife as joint tenants anymore. It's actually got to be re-registered in the name of the trust. Because if you don't do that, if you have things like we're talking about life insurance, the beneficiary in the life insurance overrides what your trust and will says. So if your trust and will says everything goes into the special needs trust, but you haven't gone to your retirement plan, you haven't gone to your life insurance and changed the beneficiary on those so that they flow into your special needs trust, they're again going to bypass the special needs trust and they're going to put your kids' benefits at risk. So it's very important not just setting up the living trust and special needs trust, but you need to make sure you get your assets in the trust. Usually the competent attorney is going to make sure you get your real estate in there because you probably, unless you're in the industry, don't know how to do the deeds to do that. But it's going to be very important to make sure that you get your other assets in the trust once that's set up. And the same thing happens too, is you may have other relatives that want to leave something to your child, either upon their death or maybe they want to make lifetime gifts for the benefit of your child. And that's why we almost always set up this special needs trust as a separate legal document. There are some attorneys out there don't necessarily know what they're doing, they will try to put special needs trusts within your living trust, special needs trust provisions within your living trust. I think it's much better to have that special needs trust as a standalone document, because that way you, again, can name special needs trust as the beneficiary on retirement plans. And also, you may have other people that want to leave life insurance. They may want to leave something in their will or their trust for your child. And they may not want to just leave it to your living trust so that you get the benefit of it. They really want to segregate it and say, no, we want your child to have that. So we set this up separately. It's got its own tax ID number. If your child may have a brother or sister that gets a job and suddenly they're members of a retirement plan and they think, oh great, I'm just going to name my brother or sister as a beneficiary here. Look at the great thing I did. Well, again, if they name your child directly, they're going to put these at risk again. So you need to make sure that anybody who may be leaving something to your child is going to leave it into the special needs trust you set up.
And part of the problem is going to be is that because these tools, these legal documents are very, very, very powerful in what we have the ability to do and use them with. But we have to sit back and realize that it's a tool. And it's like Forrest and I talk about is that so many times we tell families. I mean, I don't know how many of you, but I know that, again, just use the example of my oldest daughter who, after her mom had passed away, wanted to have my social security number. And I said, what for? She says, well, I want to name, as the beneficiary of my group life insurance at work. I go, Jackie, don't, because if something happens to me, it would wind up going to your brother. In our scenario, we said make the family trust the beneficiary. That way, any share that would go through, if something happened to her and I, it'd flow through our family trust to get into the special needs trust on behalf of my son. And how many times I've heard families sit there and say, my parents really want to leave something for my child. And I'm telling them, oh no, you can't because they can't have more than $2,000 in their name. With the special needs trust now, we have that ability to make it come alive. So, but it's hard talking to our parents and say, hey, you leaving me any money? Leaving my kid any money? I mean, we just don't do that, do we? We've been trained not to. But for our kids, guess what? It's extremely important that other people know what's going on. And one of the things that we do is we want to make sure, I like to send out, I call it the grandparent letter. So that way you don't sit back and kind of going, so are you leaving any money, not leaving any money? So we send out a letter to people that you want us to that says, hey, due to the unique needs of this particular child, if you would like to leave any type of gifts or anything like that or legacies, this is the way we'd like to have you do it. We try to put that on, we put that on our letterhead, so that way what it's trying to do is encourage a conversation that you're directing and controlling, but that way it's trying to remove that presumptuousness away from wanting to have those weird conversations that says, don't leave my kid money, you're leaving me money, because for the most part, we don't want to talk about our parents' financial situations. I know within my house, with my parents, it was one of those taboo discussions, okay? But it becomes, especially as we're getting older and there's parents living still, guess what? Their health issues or their not dying issues are going to become our problems, aren't they? It's going to have a much more critical role for our kids.
They're not dying issues? That sounds really bad.
I know.
I already do.
It's an issue. They're not dying. But you have to, that's where you come back to the power of all these things. Is saying it's one thing to create the document, but now we still have to make those documents work for us and show the power of what it's all about.
Because again, I mean, you're assuming you have living parents, they may not have named your child in their will or their trust. But what they probably said is, hey, everything goes to my kids. And if my kids aren't alive, it goes to their issue by right of representation. That's the standard will or trust clause. What that means is, if for some reason you don't survive your parents, whatever they were leaving to you now goes to your kids. Which again, same thing. We're going to lose out on these benefits until that money is spent. So they need to change their will or trust so it can still say to my kids equally, and if they don't survive me, to their issue by right of representation. However, if the beneficiary is going to be my special needs child, special needs grandchild in this case, it's instead going to go to that child's special needs trust.
So would the monies be able to be accessed, like if the child wanted to go on vacation or take a trip or something like that?
Absolutely.
Now, when those funds come out, it would be like somebody else is paying for it? Is
Yeah.
it taxed?
And that's-
or-
That's the next thing we're going to talk about, because special needs trust, living trust, has very specific provisions. It provides, unlike a will that doesn't do anything until you pass away, the living trust, like the term implies, it's a living document while you're alive. So while you're alive, all your assets are going to go in that trust. And that trust provides that, in the event I become incapacitated, then my successor trustee that I've named in here is going to use my assets for my benefit, and they are going to provide for my health, support, maintenance, education maybe. It says the trustee shall use that for my benefit in my living trust. Special needs trust can't say that. If the special needs trust says this money is going to be used for the health support and maintenance of my child, then suddenly you've basically gotten rid of the benefits here again, because the government's going to say if that trust has to be used for that child, then we don't have to provide them anything because they've got this pot of money that's worth more than $2,000. So special needs trust has to be drafted specifically so that the trustee has complete discretion on what that money is used for, when it's going to be used, how much, for what types of things it's going to be used for. It can't say it's going to provide support to my child. It's going to say
Child
it
can't be
it-
have anything to do.
it can say, it can be used for my child's special needs and leave that term very broad, so it can be used for anything the government's not providing them. So that way it doesn't put the benefits at risk. But the downside to having to have the trust with those provisions is your trustee may not know what you really want that money used for. So what we have to do, after you set up your legal documents, you need to set up a life care plan. Basically, that life care plan does a couple things. And Grady's going to probably talk more about this later. But that life care plan is going to be kind of a roadmap for your successor caregivers. Anybody who might be acting as a conservator, might just be acting as a friend or relative of your child, so that they know, one, what your child's medical history is, who their friends are, what's good for them, what isn't. Second thing that life care plan does is it can provide guidelines to your trustees as to what you want that money used for. Again, special needs trust, it's a legal document. Life care plan basically is your wishes. So it's not, the life care plan can't say, my trustee has to use this money for that. It's going to say, I would like my trustee to use this money for these things. So in that life care plan, you can say, I want my child to be able to take vacations. I want them to be able to visit relatives out of state. I want the trustee to pay for them and 10 friends to go to Disneyland once a month. Whatever it is you want, you can put in that life care plan. And that's going to provide guidelines to the special needs trustee on what you want that money or those assets that you've left your child, what they're going to do with it. Because again, you have to give your trustees a lot of discretion in the document itself so that it doesn't disqualify them from benefits. And again, we're not talking about, this is a gray area, this is aggressive planning. California has recognized, they call them supplemental discretionary needs trust or special needs trust. California's had them by statute since 1993. So they've been, by statute, allowed in California for over 20 years. Prior to that, they were allowed under common law principles. But again, this isn't something where you're cheating the government. This is something the government allows you to do to provide for your child and still allow them to receive these benefits. But again, it has to be worded very carefully. Don't go to an attorney that does your
You're
divorces and bankruptcies and personal injury. I mean, go to people, go to an attorney that knows what they're doing in this area, because they are different than a living trust. A lot of the things in your living trust also apply to special needs trust, but again, they have to be very specific in what wording can and cannot be used in the special needs trust to have it comply with the law. You want to say more about life care plans?
The thing that you always look at, that we try to understand, is that, number one, remember that our children are going to be the beneficiary of the special needs trust. The special needs trust, again, from my non-legal language, is the special needs trust is actually a beneficiary of my living trust. So it becomes the pass-through to which, so now when I go to my insurance company, name it as the beneficiary, I pass away, the $300,000 flows into my family trust, it says it's going to divide it the way I want it to be divided, and then 1/3 share would then just flow directly to the special needs trust. So it's actually the special needs trust that becomes the beneficiary of my living trust. But once it's poured in here, our children are the beneficiaries. Okay? They are not going to get direct checks. They are not going to get. We're going to take care of those supplemental expenses. And that's where
It's a different color. It's not going on very well.
But the life care plan really is the heart and soul for me. Because it talks about what my wishes are to the trustee up here inside our trust, but we're having to give them absolute discretion as to what to do with the money. So the life care plan again becomes that roadmap. So if my goal is to maybe, because what do we see within our own system? Again, because I have regional centers, so maybe your goal says that I want my children to be able to stay in the house living together. Okay, that would be my perfect world. Well, guess what? I've got regional center to help me pull it together. Okay, because remember, regional center says we're going to help take care of the housing, whether it be independent living, supported living. You are really late, or are you with somebody else? Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
We just pick on people that come in late a little bit every now and then.
So what you might be doing, well, you will be doing, is this is your house. You're going to transfer that to your living trust. And what you may do is have your living trust, hey, everything is divided equally to my 3 kids, but I want my house to go into the special needs trust.
And so, because now what I can do is I can go to regional center. I mean, our goal, mine and my wife's goal originally, was we were going to create disability frat row. And our goal was to have the house go to my son's trust when he reached 22 years old, out of the education system. But we were going to have 2 or 3 of his friends from high school that he was in special ed with, because all of them had regional center services, all of them had SSI, all of them were going to have IHSS. I could bring them into the house. And basically, because of all the regional center, I could bring supports to the house and create a 24/7 environment without having to call it a group home. That's why I wanted to call it Disability Frat Row. But now the house is owned by the Special Needs Trust, and guess what? I don't lose any of the benefits at all. The other kids that would be living with him, guess what? They can pay rent to the Special Needs Trust. Now I've kind of created a small micro enterprise. So, and that's what we try to always help facilitate. So if your goal as a family was to keep your 2 sons in that house, then our job is to sit back and say, okay, now we need to get a hold of the regional center caseworkers and say it's time to do our job. Now, they're not going to provide, you're going to still have to find the providers, you're going to have to find these organizations, which they're out there, okay? Again, they don't line up and say, here we are, all right? But that's where we pull all this stuff together so that, I mean, we just sat back with a 60-year-old man, okay, whose 91-year-old mom had passed away, who had come to us a number of years ago and got this stuff all set up. And now this guy's 68 years old, he's blind. Once upon a time, he was in a program. Mom just got tired of dealing with it because he didn't want to go to program. Gee, have we ever heard that? I want to go to school. Because they mess with our brains, don't they? And then we take that path of least resistance. But what wound up happening was we had to get this guy re-qualified for regional center. Okay? We had to sit back and reopen up a lot of things because mom just got tired of dealing with it. But right now, we got it set up so he's in that house by himself, and we are 60 hours a month away from 24/7 coverage from him, and it's not being taken care of by family. And mom got her wishes, which was to let her son be able to stay in his house and let that become his retirement home, and also be that house that, for the most part, they anticipate he'll pass away in. But we can pull all this stuff together. And again, we would have had so much more cost and time and hassles if the family, that's why to me, the legal documentation for our wishes is so, so critical. I can't create a lot of success unless I have this. But the heart and soul really is, where do you take your kids? Where do you guys go on vacation at? Do you go on vacation? Where do you guys go?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Okay, who's going to drive the Winnebago if you guys are gone? You still want the kids to go camping? Do they enjoy the experience, or is it your experience? Okay, who's going to take them? And these are the types of things that we have to come back to when we talk about that life care plan. That's our heart and soul. I wanted my little guy to still go to Disney, and who's going to take him? Because it's just something that we do as parents, isn't it? But if somebody else is going to have to do it, what does that become? It becomes cost. It becomes expense. Oh, gee, have you used my car again? That's why I wanted to put a Maserati in my driveway to be owned by the Special Needs Trust. Because I could guarantee somebody was going to come over to the house and take him places so they could drive his car. But this is how we have to create our dreams. We have to create our wishes. And again, what size clothes do your kids wear? I mean, I had no idea. My wife, God love her, she was the chief executive officer, she was the chief operations officer, and I thought I was the chief financial officer. But honest to God, I had no idea how to go buy a pair of pants for my son. I had to ask one of my friends to say, can you take him shopping? You're a girl, you're a mom. I have no clue how to do this. It's real. And we don't know when it's going to be real. And that's where it's so important that we understand, because what our kids are is they're humans without that same type of voice. Okay? And think, does your kid dress himself? Yeah. So you see him every day that he goes out of that house? And how many times do you say, did you make sure you washed your hair today? Did you make sure that you cleaned every part of your body?
He does that on the napkin.
Okay. Again, she's lucky, isn't she, guys? Wow, aren't you the special? So, but these are the things that are so important, because there are so many self-reminders. There's so many things that go on with our kids. And that's why I think this is overwhelming. It really is. And that's why we have to sit back and take it one step at a time, one piece at a time, because it's like, it's like the layers of the onion. You peel one back. And how many things are we going to do? Our kid reaches age 18. Oh my God, I got to have a discussion about these trusts. I got to have a discussion about Social Security. I got to have a discussion about IHSS, conservatorship. Oh my God. And what do we do? Nothing. It gets scary. But yet, we all have this quiet little prayer that not many people understand. It says, let us live one day longer than our child, for fear of who's going to be there tomorrow. That's real, isn't it? Okay? And believe me, going through it, I don't want anybody to have to go through that experience. Because it's a terrible, terrible experience to have to go through. But I have a peace with it. That I know my little guy's safe and upstairs with God and his mom. Hate every minute of it. But that fear that we have, and that's why we have to drive as much as we can and know that, and that's why I'm so blessed to have had my son, because if it weren't for here, I wouldn't be standing in front of you guys and talking about how do we create those tools to give us as much peace as we possibly can have as parents. It says that if something happens tomorrow, I'm just gonna say job well done. But it's scary because we think we have the license to live to what, 150 years old? Because we're gonna outlive our kids, darn it. But that's where the fears start coming into place, and how do we pull all those things together? And that's where our kids have heart, they have soul, and that's where, go ahead.
That's kind of
Go
whole
ahead.
whole plan put together.
Whole plan put together. Go ahead.
This is kind of what we've been talking about. Set up your living trust upon your passing. You have 3 kids. Your other kids without special needs may get their share outright, or they may not. There's a lot of so-called normal kids that aren't good handling money at age 18 or maybe even age 25. So you may put restrictions on your living trust on when they're going to get their inheritance. But anything you leave to your special needs beneficiaries and go in that special needs trust. You're going to get to name who the trustees are on that, who are going to take care of all the financial aspects of your kids' lives. They're still going to receive their government benefits, even though they've got the special needs trust, they've got the inheritance. You're going to nominate conservators in your will. Whether or not you have conservatorship while you're alive, whether or not you need it, you are going to make sure you nominate someone, so if one is needed when you're gone, the court's going to look at the people that you've nominated. Again, you don't get to say that's going to be the person. You get to nominate them, still has to go through the court system, but the court, everything being equal, is going to go with the people. By law, they have to go with the people that you've put down there, because anybody that you've put down as a potential conservator is basically equal in the statute to the parent. The statute provides, here's the people that can be conservators, and here's what the preference we're going to give them. So, you may have a cousin or something that you think could be a great conservator, but before they could ever be named as conservator, the aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters and everybody have to decline to do it. But if you name your 3rd cousin as a conservator because they have a great relationship with your child, then the court's going to look at them just like they looked at you because you've nominated them as conservator. So you get to nominate the conservator, and again, all these benefits are going to flow through to your child. And what happens, we talked about, maybe you want to put your house in the special needs trust, make sure your child always has a place to live. If say you're older and all you have is your house and you need to go in a nursing home, you may know, okay, you can get Medi-Cal to pay for your nursing home and still own that house. But what happens to that house when you pass away? Medi-Cal gets reimbursement for all the money they've put out for the nursing home and everything for you. With a special needs trust, that's not the case. You can put your house in that special needs trust. Your child lives there for the rest of their life. When they pass away, whatever is left in that special needs trust is going to go to whoever it is you want to go to, whether it's your other kids. To your other kids' special needs trust, you got a separate special needs trust for different kids. It might go to your favorite charities. Anybody know any good charities?
Yeah, quit coaching, guys.
Cassie?
Open doors first.
Open Doors, Dignity
Open
Group.
Doors, Dignity Group. It doesn't matter. Your church, the ASPCA. You can say whatever is left in that special needs trust when your child is finally gone, hopefully many years in the future, you're going to put in there who's going to get that trust. And there's no Medi-Cal reimbursement. Nothing gets paid back to the government. Your child uses those assets for their lifetime. Upon their death, you get to say where those assets are going to go. So again, it's kind of putting together the plan. And again, I don't have a life care plan up there.
No, you
This is an
don't.
old
I was
diagram.
I was wondering what kind of thunder you were taking away from
I know
me.
there should be a life care plan box up here that basically helps guide the special needs
He just wanted to
trustee.
get one of his slides in.
Well, I didn't even know you had my slides, so I'm excited. But anyway, this is kind of how it all comes together. But again, you need to look at the big picture. And, not a commercial for Dignity Group, but basically you need someone who's going to look at all the parts and make sure, you go to your life insurance expert or your investment advisor, your broker. They don't understand the disability world. They don't understand how these things fit together. We still have a lot of people saying, if they know anything about disabilities, oh, well, your child with a disability, we don't want to name them as a beneficiary on this. Well, yeah, you don't want to name them as beneficiary, but you need to go one step further. You need to name your trust, or you need to name the special needs trust as beneficiary.
And even as an example, in a case that we're working with that we're involved with right now, where we can do as much as we can to help families. And we try to sit back and say, we got to find all these working parts in your world. But right now, for example, how often do you get paid? Every month, or every couple of months, or
It's a little personal.
Huh? But not you. Okay, let's assume that we get paid once a
Under
month.
table at the end of the night.
Under table cash. But I get paid what at the end of the month, don't I? Okay, I get paid once I've done whatever my jobs are to do. So if you pass away tomorrow, somebody owes you a check still, don't they? Or they owe it to your family. Wouldn't it make sense for us to go to our employer that says, hey, something happens to me, I want to make sure that my last paycheck or my unaccrued vacation pay is going to flow into my family trust as well. So we have to remember that there's just so many little things, and that's what we find is that there's just not many people out there that really understand that this is who we are. We're a disability family. We live in that disability world 24/7, going back to what I was saying earlier. And so I can find good attorneys out there. I can find good financial people out there. I might even think I'm a good do-it-yourselfer. Okay? But the bottom line is that we've got to understand that this is the world that we live in. And everything that we do, and I've always used to say that every financial magazine, we get all these financial magazines, they tell us what to do, the government tells us what to do. We should sit back and say, unless you have a kid with special needs, because the rules change for everything. And that's what a lot of the people that are working within our lives don't really understand. And that's why our world is driven by this disability component or this special needs component. Again, got transportation for your one to get to the program?
He runs the public bus.
Okay, cool. So you got mobility training, didn't he?
For me. I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. But again, we take a look at all these dynamics, and thank God he's been able to master that part of the program. But if there's any deviation to that program for him right now, what's going to happen? It's going to be a week or a month or, because somebody else is going to have to take over that training, isn't it? Or aren't they, or whatever you might want to say. So, but that's why we're always trying to take a look at the different transitions, because we're trying to keep these things in place as much as we possibly can. So, these meetings are always the hardest meetings because we hit a lot of subjects very fast. We don't go into a lot of detail. And I know none of you would like to go to a 3-day seminar that I go to for Social Security, just on Social Security issues alone for 3 days. It is the driest, most boringest place to be, but yet it is probably one of the more critical tools that we need as parents to understand the dynamics. And that's where we kind of come back to all of our working parts and looking at those things. And that's where we try to sit back and just realize that we have some great tools out there. We have some great ways and great methods to be able to protect our kids when we no longer have the ability to protect them. And again, being able to protect my son from his sister, not that I want anything bad things to happen, but now I can name her. I used to always sit back and say, I trust Forrest with my money and my money decision making because he's smart enough to know what to do and to get help. And that's what I look for when I'm trying to create trustees is who are the people that are smart enough to know they're stupid, okay? That they know to go get help, that they're not going to be a do-it-yourself, that they've got all the answers. But I do want to have as many checks and balances in place as I can for a child that I know, or an adult, is not going to be able to have all of those tools necessary. And that's why we always try to sit back and say, how do we get all these pieces together? The age 18 and age 22 are probably the scariest places to be because we hit some very major transitions. We hear a lot of words, we hear a lot of situations, and it's just a scary place to be, but if there's that time to do, again, if we got a kid who's 14, got a kid who's 13, be ready, okay, so that we know what to do. Don't be that family that's coming into my office when our child is 22 years old and say, I tried to put money away for him for college and now there's $100,000 in his account and I can't do anything with it and we're not getting benefits.
How do we get those people out of those situations so that we can make it start being right again? And again, certain things, because he's an attorney, I'm not. So certain things he has to say things a certain way because he is an attorney. I don't. Well, I really don't. Do I? But the bottom line is that how do we get through it within, again, the legal parameters, and then realizing that what we live in is we live in a very practical world, logical world, philosophical, and that's how we have to try to bring all these things together. Because it's hard. And it's a process. But to me, if we haven't taken care of this side of it first, instead if I'm gone tomorrow, or if my spouse and I are gone, this to me, because I can always build your child with a life care plan if I absolutely have to. But if I haven't taken care of my legal infrastructure first, then I can destroy just amazing amounts of time and money and cost by not having it set up in place. And guys, I want to say thank you tonight. I don't know what Forrest wants to say, and I want to thank Forrest.
Well, I'd like to say thank you, too.
We're still learning to play this. Come and step in and talk while I'm talking, and then I always want to get in the way of what he's saying. But I want to thank Cassie again for having us out here tonight. And again, I wish you all the very best, and hopefully this has been informative. Our cards are inside the folders. If you have any questions, we will always return phone calls. It might not be that same day like I used to promise, but we will get back to you within 72 hours is always our goal, to try to get back to somebody within a couple of days. Feel free to call and ask questions. Again, as things are more specific and personal to you as families. And feel free to, again, we have our website, which is dignitygroup.org, giving a little bit more presentations of some different things we have. Again, we as families are the greatest source of information. We've got such a great underground network. And again, Cassie's got her life that she's devoted to not helping just her own kids, but also to helping other families with putting these things together. I was blessed with my wife and her girlfriend who started a Down syndrome support group. And I know that without the families that we've been involved with and have been able to meet over the years, but we are that unity, guys. We are that bond. We are that information of getting information out for each other, to each other, the best that we possibly can, because we're not alone. And we're in this fight together to make a better difference in our kids' world. Because our kids have definitely turned around and made a difference in our lives, regardless of how many times we want to pull our hair out. And because sometimes I think they're crazy makers. But on that note, I want to say thank you very much.